Lyle and Layla, the Shipwrecked Siblings. We publish a new bedtime read-along story every night, so make sure to tap the subscribe button so you never miss any. Chapter 1, Setting Sail. Lyle and Layla stood on the deck of their grandfather's boat, gazing out at the vast expanse of sea before them. The sun was shining, the waves were calm, and the salty air filled their nostrils. It was the first day of their summer vacation, and they were excited to be spending it with their grandparents on the coast. Their grandfather, a weathered but spry man in his 70s, had promised to take them on a boat trip to explore the nearby islands. Lyle, who was 10 years old, and Layla, who was 8, had always loved the ocean and were eager to set sail. As they pulled away from the dock, Lyle and Layla's grandfather regaled them with stories of his own adventures on the sea. He told them of storms that nearly sank his ship, of giant squids that attacked in the dead of night, and of a mysterious island just beyond the horizon that was said to be full of treasure. Lyle and Layla's eyes grew wide with excitement as their grandfather spoke. They had always loved stories of adventure and imagined themselves as brave explorers, like in the books they had read. "Do you really think there's treasure on that island, Grandpa?" asked Layla, tugging on his sleeve. Her grandfather grinned. "Well, I don't know for sure, but they say where there's smoke, there's fire. And there have been plenty of rumors about that island over the years." Lyle and Layla exchanged a look. They both knew what they wanted to do. They wanted to find that island and see if the rumors were true. "Can we go there, Grandpa?" asked Lyle, his voice filled with eagerness. Their grandfather's face took on a serious look. "Now hold on, kids. That island is dangerous. No one knows what's really there, and there could be all sorts of hazards we don't even know about. It's not a place to take lightly." Lyle and Layla deflated a bit, but they didn't give up hope. They spent the rest of the boat trip asking their grandfather about the island and what it might be like. As the sun began to set, their grandfather turned the boat back towards the shore. But as they sailed, they saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon. A storm was coming, and it looked like a big one. Their grandfather tensed up, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Hold on, kids. This is going to be a rough one." The wind picked up, whipping Lyle and Layla's hair around their faces. The waves grew higher and higher, crashing against the boat with violent force. Lyle and Layla clung to the rails, trying not to get thrown overboard. But then, in the chaos, something terrible happened. The boat was struck by a massive wave and Lyle and Layla were thrown into the water. The siblings thrashed around in the churning sea, trying to stay afloat. But then, Lyle saw something through the rain and the waves, their grandfather's boat, disappearing into the distance. "Grandpa," he cried, but his voice was lost in the storm. Lyle and Layla clung to each other, bobbing up and down in the water. They were alone, stranded in the middle of the ocean with no way to call for help. Chapter 2, Survival Mode. Lyle and Layla struggled to keep their heads above water as the storm raged around them. They called out for their grandfather, but their cries were drowned out by the howling wind and crashing waves. As the night wore on, they realized that they were on their own. As dawn broke, the storm had passed, but they were still stranded in the middle of the ocean. They looked around, hoping to see land, but all they could see was water in every direction. "We have to do something," said Lyle, his teeth chattering with cold. Layla nodded, her face set in determination. "We can't just sit here and wait. We have to try to find a way to get rescued." They clung to a piece of driftwood that had been caught in the waves, using it as a makeshift raft. They knew that they needed to conserve their energy, so they tried not to move too much, but the waves kept pushing them around. As the day wore on, they grew thirsty and hungry. They had no food or water, and the salt water was making them more and more dehydrated. "We have to find some fresh water," said Layla, her voice barely above a whisper. Lyle nodded, scanning the horizon. And then, he saw it, a small island in the distance. It wasn't the mysterious island their grandfather had told them about, but it was a start. "We have to swim for it," said Lyle, pointing to the island. Layla hesitated. "What about the sharks? And the currents?" Lyle shook his head. "We don't have a choice. We can't stay out here any longer. They kicked off their shoes and slowly began to paddle towards the island. The water was colder than they expected, and their limbs grew numb from the effort. But they kept going, their eyes locked on the shoreline. As they approached the island, they saw that it was rocky and steep. There was no beach, no easy way to get ashore. "We have to climb," said Lyle, pointing to a rocky outcropping. They paddled towards the rocks and began to scramble up the steep slope. It was difficult, and they slipped and fell several times, but eventually they made it to the top. From there, they could see that the island was bigger than they thought. It was covered in dense jungle, and they could hear the sounds of animals rustling in the bushes. "We have to find fresh water and food," said Layla, her stomach growling. They started to explore the island, using the driftwood as a makeshift walking stick. They found a freshwater stream and eagerly drank from it, feeling the cool liquid soothe their parched throats. They also found some berries and nuts that looked edible, and they gathered as many as they could carry. As the days went on, they worked to create a shelter using branches and leaves. They built a fire and tried to signal passing ships using the smoke. But as the days turned into weeks, they began to lose hope. No one came, and they were still stranded on the island. But through it all, they stuck together. They learned how to fish and hunt for food, how to purify water, and how to make tools. They found joy in the small things, like the sunset over the ocean and the stars twinkling in the sky. Even though they were alone, they felt like they were part of something bigger, the vast, untamed world that surrounded them. Chapter 3, Treasure Hunt. Weeks had passed since Lyle and Layla had been stranded on the island, and they had become quite resourceful. They had built a shelter, caught fish, and found a reliable source of fresh water. But despite their survival skills, they were growing restless. They missed their grandfather, and they longed to be rescued. One day, as they were exploring the island, they stumbled upon an old, weather-beaten map. It was clearly ancient, but the drawings on it were clear. There was an X marking a spot on the island, and the word treasure was scrawled in large letters. Lyle and Layla looked at each other, excitement filling their eyes. This was it. They could find the treasure and use it to signal for help. Maybe it was their grandfather who left the map for them to find. They set out to follow the map, which led them deep into the jungle. They hacked their way through the thick undergrowth with their makeshift machetes, dodging snakes and spiders as they went. Finally, they reached the spot where the X was marked on the map. It was a clearing in the jungle, and they saw an old, rusty chest sitting in the middle. With trembling hands, they opened the chest. Inside, there were gold coins, jewels, and other treasures. They gasped in wonder, imagining how much money they could get for these treasures once they were rescued. But their joy was short-lived. As they were examining the treasures, they heard a rustling in the bushes. Suddenly, a group of pirates burst into the clearing, swords drawn. Lyle and Layla were paralyzed with fear. They had never seen real pirates before, and these were rough-looking men with tattoos and scars. "What do you think you're doing, little ones?" growled the leader of the pirates. Lyle and Layla tried to explain that they were stranded on the island and had found the treasure by accident, but the pirates didn't believe them. They were convinced that Lyle and Layla had come to steal their treasure. The pirates tied Lyle and Layla up and held them captive. They demanded that they reveal where they had hidden their own treasure, which they believed the siblings had stolen. But Lyle and Layla had no idea what they were talking about. They were innocent and desperate to escape. They waited for an opportunity to escape. Finally, one day, when the pirates were distracted, they were able to free themselves and make a run for it. They ran back to their shelter, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew they couldn't stay on the island any longer. They had to find a way to signal for help and get off the island. They decided to use some of the treasure to create a signal fire on the beach. They hoped that a passing ship would see the smoke and come to their rescue. They worked tirelessly, gathering branches and leaves, and building a large fire. They waited anxiously for a ship to appear on the horizon. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they saw a small boat approaching the island. They frantically waved their arms and shouted for help. The boat came closer, and they saw that it was their grandfather. He had finally come to rescue them. They hugged their grandfather tightly, tears streaming down their faces. They were finally safe and on their way home. As they sailed away from the island, they looked back, knowing that they had learned valuable lessons about survival, perseverance, and the power of hope. The end. Do you want to hear more stories? Then hit the subscribe button to follow our channel, so you never miss another daily story. And keep listening now, as more stories will play shortly.